Hello, class. AJ here. Hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to talk about supply and demand modeling. It's called comparative statics. It simply looks at four possible outcomes with respect to changes in supply and demand. And I'm going to let you get kind of a lay of the land here as I fix this. And, oops, it's got to be perfect. So on the upper left, we have an increase in demand. The lower left, we have a decrease in demand. The upper right, we have an increase in supply. And the lower right, we have a decrease in supply. These are the four possible outcomes. Let's start with an increase in demand in the upper left. Okay. What will happen here? Now notice I have a S1D1. That simply means we're looking at the market at a moment in time period 1. And then we're going to posit a change. Here the demand curve is going to increase. Remember to use this as your frame of reference. Increase says move further away, shift to your right. Here is an increase in demand. I would note this here is an increase in demand. Notice what happens. Now, the partial equilibrium aspect of this is you take a snapshot of the market at time period 1. You then look at the market at time period 2 and see what happens. Well, the demand has increased. What's going to happen to price? What's going to happen to quantity? We're going to go to PE2. We're going to have an increase in price, and we're going to have an increase in sales. You go from this initial point to this point at time period 2. What caused this to happen? Well, the first thing here is that you can look at all the non-price variables, the shift factors in our general functional form for demand, and I have these all listed out here. It could be a change in tastes and preferences. The number of buyers went up. It's a normal good and your income went up. It's an inferior good and your income went down. Okay, the price of a substitute went up and the price of a complement went down. These are all the shift factors, and you can model this by simply shifting the demand curve farther out to the right. One thing I'm going to talk about real briefly here is, let's go back and let's understand, why do prices rise? What happens is it takes a while for the market to catch up to itself. So this distance right here represents a shortage. And you know from our last lectures is that anytime there's a shortage, there's going to be pressure for price to rise. So let's summarize this. When demand curve shifts up, here an increase in demand, try and here, that will lead to an increase in price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. All three arrows are moving in the same direction. Okay, everybody okay with that? Let's go on to a decrease in demand. We start with our initial equilibrium position, and now the demand curve will, instead of shifting out and to the right, it will shift in closer to the origin. It will shift left. So I have now a decrease in demand. I go from this original equilibrium 1 to a new equilibrium 2, and you can see in this case both my equilibrium price and my equilibrium quantity will fall. Okay, what caused this to happen? Well, you take all the arrows from the up above and you flip them around. A decrease in demand could be caused by a change in taste and preferences down. People just simply don't want to buy this good anymore. It could be the number of buyers decreased. It could be a normal good and your income went down. It could be an inferior good, your income went up. Okay, Top Ramen Example of an inferior good. You get a raise at work. Do you go to Costco and buy top ramen? No, you take your family out for food for dinner, right? You're changing the price of a substitute and changing the price of the complement. Now, similar to what we did before, let's look at what happens initially and why do prices fall. This distance right here, again, remember, it takes a little bit of time for the market to catch up to itself. At this distance right here, when the demand curve shifts to the left, you have a surplus, and there's going to be pressure for price to fall. That is what's fueling this price decrease that we see over here on the vertical axis. Okay, that's mostly market dynamics. I don't think you have to know that in particular to be successful in this class, but it's pretty interesting for you though. Stop and think about this. Anytime you see shortages in the market, think rising prices. Anytime you see surpluses in the market, think falling prices. Or to turn that around, anytime you see prices rising, think shortage. Anytime you see prices falling, think surplus. Now on to the right hand side of our diagram, or of our screen here. Let's look at an increase in supply. Which way is the supply curve going to shift? Be careful. Use this as your frame of reference. The supply curve will shift out and away or to the right, and it will go like this, and this will be an increase in supply. You started out at this initial equilibrium, and you went to this equilibrium. Notice what happens here. Your equilibrium price will fall and your equilibrium quantity will increase. Okay? What caused this to happen? An increase in supply can be caused by a change in the number of sellers, the change in costs down, the change in the number of sellers up, the change in costs down. Now, technology could lead to lower costs, so let's include that in our increase in supply. Change in taxes down, change in subsidies up, and the change in the price of a substitute went down. Notice what happens here. Similar situation. Now we have falling prices. Why do prices fall? I told you before. Think surplus. The market dynamics is this. Something disturbed the market on the supply side, causing the supply side to increase. It takes a while for the market to catch up to itself. The way we do the modeling is you jump from 1 to 2. The market doesn't move that way. It gyrates or kind of gravitates from 1 to 2. So that surplus would put a depressing effect on price. Let me backtrack for just a second over here because I think this is kind of important. Let me go back to the lower left and talk about demand. And anytime, like I did up here, anytime you have a decrease in demand, you're going to have a decrease in price and a decrease in quantity. So when you're stuck on a test or you're trying to evaluate stuff that's going on in the market, if it's a demand side change, all the arrows move in the same direction. If it's a supply side change in supply up, now we're going to have a change in price down and a change in quantity up. So now you have 2 arrows going up and 1 arrow going down. But it lets you know that this is going to be a supply side change rather than a demand side change. And then lastly here, we're going to look at a decrease in supply, and this is in the lower right of your screen. Which way is the supply curve going to shift? This is your frame of reference. It shifts in or closer to, this would be S sub 2. Here is your decrease in supply. You go from this initial equilibrium 1 to now this equilibrium 2, and you can clearly see that prices have risen and sales or quantity falls. Okay, Now remember, why do prices rise? In this instance, back to our dynamics, here's a shortage. That temporary shortage will give pressure for price to rise and push you towards equilibrium point number 2. Now notice, to summarize this again, is now we had a decrease in supply, but we had an increase in price and a decrease in quantity. You can see now the relationship, or the directions that the arrows are pointed. That's just another hint for you to know that it's a supply side change, rather than our friends over here where we're having all the arrows move together. So that's your 4 comparative statics. I hope you work on this. You must start practicing on your own. Draw these out, understand your shift variables, and you'll be good to go. Talk to you later. Bye.